December 24th, 1865. The day the Ku Klux Klan was born. This date refers to the start of the first Ku Klux Klan, because there wasn't just one, but several more, but we'll see that later. The Ku Klux Klan was born after the famous American Civil War, where the South fought against the North over issues such as loyalty to Lincoln and the use of slaves, denying their rights, among other things. At the end of this war, white supremacy, racism, and xenophobia were words used daily by most inhabitants of the United States, not to mention that they exercised their rights as white people over anyone who had some darker skin tones. The Ku Klux Klan would become the channel for the leftover racist hatred from the Civil War. Returning to the topic, the first Ku Klux Klan, as it was called in the United States, it emerged from a group of friends who were bored at Christmas. They were opposed at that time to what was called Reconstruction. This term was given to the redemption towards slavery in this nation. With it, slaves were eliminated, embracing emancipation and freedom a step further, and created an organization. Before that, they created an organization. Before the famous name appeared, other options were considered. The Merry Six or Pulaski Social Club, referring to the city where they lived. The final name came from a mix of words that were modified to have more impact. The one translated from Greek would mean circle, and they chose it to emphasize their circle of friends. To this, Captain Kennedy also added Klan because of his Scottish ancestors. They would later change the C in this word to a K, so it would sound and look better. They later separated Ku Klux into two words, changing the O to a U and the S at the end to an X. All of this was only to make it sound more impactful, and thus the first Ku Klux Klan was born. This organization was dedicated to performing games and rituals in which they humiliated the victims. In other words, it was a kind of social club where young people could find their place. Among these ways of having fun, they made night excursions through their town, Pulaski, disguised with sheets and masks to scare people into believing they were ghosts. So they assumed it was something like the current hidden cameras, but without a camera. It was something like the current hidden cameras, but without a camera. They created ranks that were assigned to the members, in addition to the clothing that derived from the white sheets they used at the beginning. With them, they intended to offer a gloomy atmosphere to their meetings. Without waiting too long, they recruited new young people who committed to keeping the club's secret. The strange rituals for that time were just beginning to be realized in the neighboring cities and states. New clans were being engendered. The innocence with which the boredom of 6 people began was multiplying rapidly, giving rise to one of the worst terrorist organizations in the history of the United States. Upon reaching what would be the end of the Reconstruction period of the United States with the embers of the Civil War still warm, the Ku Klux Klan takes advantage to harden its pastimes and begins with the oppression of several groups of people. The most affected were the carpetbaggers, who were the Northerners who moved to the South, mostly Federals who supposedly took advantage of the locals. Most of these people wanted to help the slaves, always with religious undertones. On the other hand, the Ku Klux Klan oppressed the freed slaves and the scalawags, who were the Southern whites who joined the Republican Party. They were also allies of people of color. The support for slavery given by the Democratic Party made many of its members want to belong to the Klan, who informally repudiated the Republican Party. To make clear the reason for the hatred, we must explain this. Within all the states of the United States, 11 of them, all from the South, had proclaimed independence as the Confederate States of America. All this to maintain the slavery that the northern states wanted to prohibit. Among the Southerners, hatred increased towards those from the North, who were the richest and most industrialized. During and after the war, the Southern landowners only had hatred towards the blacks. These ranchers had free labor until the slaves migrated to the North. In this way, the economy of the southern United States was hanging by a thread full of hostility. Shortly after this new terrorist organization appeared, attacks on Republican leaders began, carrying out their respective assassinations, as was the case with Arkansas's James M. Hines, 3 members of the South Carolina legislature, and other men. The Klux Klan was mostly decentralized. Its groups operated independently, but unified by one purpose: the defense of the South. They had a flexible hierarchy, organized and managed internally. They were not improvised. Because they were carrying out illegal actions, they purposely avoided putting their goals in writing. From 1866 to 1867, the Klan burst into the religious sessions of the black community, in addition to invading homes to steal firearms under the pretext of disarming black Civil War veterans. Groups of hooded men carried out several attacks, always making sure they outnumbered their targets to threaten with death, beat, torture, and murder, all with the central purpose of instilling fear and shock. The Ku Klux Klan expanded its ideals and sought the political and social control of the freed slaves. In addition to physical violence, it attempted to break the education, economy, the right to bear arms, and voting rights of African Americans. In addition, Southern Republicans were also a target of their intimidation. In 1867, George Gordon, one of the first members of the Ku Klux Klan, wrote a proposal where he described the organization of the Klan, its principles, and its purposes. The following year, he gave a speech where he warned that they had been victims of attacks and in self-defense had to act to suppress their enemies. There are many examples of what was happening at that time, but we are going to tell one of them. During the general elections in Georgia in April of 1868, 1,222 votes had been registered for Rufus Bullock, who was the Republican candidate. In the presidential elections of November of that year, following the attacks of the Ku Klux Klan, only 1 vote was counted in favor of the Republican candidate. His way of proceeding was varied. Nighttime assaults on black men, women, and children were very common, where they were berated, threatened with death, or kidnapped. Beatings, floggings, tortures, and murders became commonplace by the end of the 1860s. The attacks increased during election campaigns. The racial violence of that time had a clear political component. Only in the state of Louisiana, 1,081 deaths and hundreds of injuries were recorded during the 1868 campaign, although not all victims were not African Americans. In 1870, the Ku Klux Klan had branches in almost every southern state. Although Democratic leaders would later attribute Ku Klux Klan violence to the poorest whites in the South, the organization's membership ranged from small farmers and laborers to lawyers, merchants, doctors, and ministers. In the regions where most of the terrorist activity took place, local law enforcement agents, the local police, belonged to the Klan and those who did not refuse to take action against it. There were cases where those who arrested Ku Klux Klan members had difficulty finding people willing to testify against them. On the other hand, prominent white citizens of the South refused to speak out against the group's actions, thus giving them implicit approval. After 1870, Republican state governments in the South turned to Congress for help. Because by that time the Ku Klux Klan's aggressions, killings, and violations were unsustainable. This resulted in the passage of 3 laws. The strongest of them was to counteract the actions of the Ku Klux Klan. Under the presidency of Ulysses Grant, the 15th Amendment recognized the voting rights of African Americans. In 1871, the Ku Klux Klan Act was passed, a law that defined the Klan's violence as a rebellion against the country and allowed the president to proclaim martial law in the most problematic areas. These laws would lead to greater involvement of the military and more arrests of Klan members. For the first time, the Ku Klux Klan Act designated certain crimes committed by individuals as federal crimes, including conspiracies to deprive citizens of the right to hold public office, serve on juries, and enjoy equal protection of the law. This is how they suppressed Klan violence. This expansion of federal authority outraged Democrats and even alarmed many Republicans. By the end of 1876, the entire South was back under Democratic control. The Ku Klux Klan would end up dismantled, at least a part of them. Despite the alleged defeat, many of the Klan's objectives were still being met. The racist influence had contributed to the fact that after the American Reconstruction, local and state power would continue in some southern states. Racial segregation paradoxically remained in place from the shadows. The new Ku Klux Klan would be born in a strange way. During the First World War, there was a new wave of black migrants from the south to the northern areas, which was joined by immigrants from Europe. To spread his message to the new invisible empire, he had the support of the media and specifically Hollywood, which was an unexpected yet decisive ally for his terrorist resurgence. All the success was due to a movie. History is usually written by the winners, but that was not the case when The Birth of a Nation premiered on February 8, 1915. The controversial film by D. Griffith was about the Civil War and Reconstruction. In it, he depicted the Ku Klux Klan as brave saviors of a war-torn southern United States devastated by the North and the freed black slaves. William Joseph Simmons was considered the founder of the Second Ku Klux Klan. While recovering from an accident, this Georgia preacher closely followed the national success of The Birth of a Nation. On the streets, you could get aprons, costumes, and badges inspired by the Ku Klux Klan that glorified the defunct organization. Simmons took advantage of the past. On the premiere night, Simmons and his companions from the past. On the premiere night, Simmons and his clanmates, dressed in white sheets and Confederate uniforms, paraded down Pitcher Street on hooded horses, firing rifle salutes in front of the theater. The effect was captivating, and screenings in more cities echoed the display, including movie ushers wearing white sheets. Klan members also distributed Ku Klux Klan literature before and after the screenings. All this real history was added to other values for those of the Klan, as this second generation was not only anti-black but also opposed to Roman Catholics, Jews, foreigners, and organized workers. The organization adopted a burning cross as a symbol, this reference taken from the movie. The peculiarity arises when in the book a cross is set on fire, but not the one we all know, but one in the shape of an X. So everything the Ku Klux Klan did was out of context. From that moment on, he held assemblies, parades, and marches all over the country. During the 1920s, at its peak, the Klan's membership exceeded 4 million people across the country. That rise was crucial. There, a propaganda department was set up, led by specialists, which allowed the number of affiliates to reach so high. In addition, the Ku Klux Klan's resources were then in the millions thanks to the fees from its members and donations. It was common to see big businessmen, law enforcement officers, judges, and politicians being part of the organization. The Klan was beginning to encompass everything. Their organization was far superior to the first, and their social, political, and economic influence was relentless. This invisible empire fueled racist violence, leaving hundreds dead and an uncountable number of tortured, injured, and intimidated. The new Klan adopted new ideologies. It abandoned the North-South discourse and focused on a general racist hatred, attacking anything that was not American, white, and Protestant. But what goes up must come down, and the fall of the Ku Klux Klan was swift. The Great Depression wreaked havoc on the organization and marked the end of its golden era. For those who don't know what the Great Depression was or what happened at that time, I invite you to watch the video called "The Day Wall Street Fell" here on this channel, on the day that the infamous Black Thursday depleted the ranks of Klan members and went from 4 million to almost 3,000 affiliates. Thus, the organization would temporarily dissolve in 1944. The civil rights movement of the 1960s saw a surge in local Klan activity throughout the South, including bombings, beatings, and shootings of white and black activists. As situations had changed, these actions, carried out in secret but seemingly the work of local Klan members, outraged the nation and helped to win much of the subsequent support for enhancing civil rights. One of the most abhorrent acts, and it can be put on the scale of the Ku Klux Klan, was when 3 young civil rights activists were brutally murdered. This was the case that inspired the movie called Mississippi Burning. An African American and 2 New Yorkers were hitchhiking on a road in Mississippi. It was night when James Forsyth sees them, recognizes them, and picks them. This trip would lead them to their death. The 3 had been working to register black voters during the Freedom Summer and had been arrested by the police on false charges, imprisoned for several hours, and then released in the middle of the night on June 21st and left at the mercy of the Ku Klux Klan. The bodies were found 2 months later by divers from the United States Navy. James Ford Seal and Charles Marcus Edwards, 29 and 31 years old, both Klan members, were arrested as a result of a police operation carried out by Federal Bureau of Investigation members and officers from the Mississippi Highway Patrol on November 6, 1964. Then, the 2 murderers confessed their guilt. The Federal Bureau of Investigation releases them after 5 days due to lack of evidence and after family members posted a $5,000 bail each. For the following years, the case is dismissed. The prosecution alleged that the police covered up for the Ku Klux Klan. Local authorities turned a blind eye to all the abuses committed by the organization. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson gave a speech in which he publicly condemned the Klan and announced the arrest of 4 important members in relation to the murder of a white civil rights worker in Alabama. The cases in the following decades. Some fragmented members aligned in the following decades. Some fragmented members aligned with neo-Nazi organizations from the 1970s. At the beginning of the 1990s, it is estimated that the Klan had between 6,000 and 10,000 active members, mainly in the Deep South. The Klan is still active today. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization that records the activity of hate-promoting organizations in the United States, it stated that there are still about 50 active Klans, totaling between 5,000 and 8,000 members in total, most in the former Confederate Southern states. However, they are primarily strong on the internet, and their activity outside the virtual world is very limited and focuses on traditional private ceremonies such as cross burnings and nothing more. Public acts are increasingly scarce, and during 2019 they almost did not exist. The small groups, most with less than 25 members, that make up the scattered organization of the current Ku Klux Klan are very uncoordinated and even rival each other. Even so, they handle similar patterns, such as their participation in tributes to the extinct Confederation and in protests to their heroes, as happened in the August 2017 riots in Charlottesville, Virginia. Ku Klux Klan members are also joining events organized by other movements or right-wing supremacists, such as acts against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community and the fight against the Black Lives Matter movement. In June 2020, in the context of protests over the death of African-American George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer, a self-proclaimed Klan leader tried to run over a group of protesters, injuring one of them. However, the so-called Invisible Empire is facing an imminent decline, but it doesn't seem like the Klans are giving up. Everything that is far-right today, as well as inheritances based on resentment, whether from a racial standpoint or personal decisions, is largely due to the entourages of the Ku Klux Klan. Looking at it this way, what seems extinct can mutate with different names, with different ideologies, and unfortunately can reappear. And that's the end of today's video on the history of the Ku Klux Klan. I hope you found what I shared interesting, as I didn't find many YouTube videos discussing this topic. I tried to give you an overview so that you know in broad terms what happened and how dangerous it is when an extreme right-wing ideology like this one starts to gain popularity and disguises itself with a message that seems innocent. A message like a movie, for example, and people buy what this movie is telling and become members of a nefarious group like this one. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, I ask you to please subscribe, activate notifications. I invite you to watch other videos on this channel. I'm Magnus Mephisto, and this was the day that...
Thank you for watching.